He grew up in Asheville, North Carolina, fishing and hunting on the grounds of Biltmore, the private estate of the Vanderbilts. In 1940, he volunteered for the Army Air Corps. He wanted to fly bombers and took command of a B-17 just in time for the beginning of the war. During training, he met a girl from Memphis and fell in love. He flew with her picture mounted on the dashboard of his B-17, which he named for her. He and his men became the first bomber crew to survive 25 missions. Hollywood made them famous, and with the war still raging, they returned to tour the United States, conquering heroes no longer required to fight. Offered a safe job as a training instructor, he volunteered instead for additional combat service in the Pacific. That decision cost him his fiancée in Memphis, ending what may have been the greatest love story of the war. He is Robert Morgan. His plane was the Memphis Belle, and they are both legends of air power. Robert Morgan was born in 1919 in Asheville, North Carolina. His father, David, was an executive at a furniture manufacturer. His mother, Mabel, a dreamy romantic who became fast friends with Cornelia Vanderbilt. The mountains of North Carolina were a wonderful place to grow up, and Morgan had the run of the 125,000-acre Vanderbilt estate. He hunted and fished and thought of himself as entitled to the easy life he enjoyed. In 1929, everything changed. The stock market crash and ensuing depression cost David Morgan his job and cost the family its house. Cornelia Vanderbilt invited the Morgans to move into an empty house on her estate, and David found work as a night watchman, making $50 a month. In 1936, doctors diagnosed Mabel Morgan with thyroid cancer. Unable to face a slow death, she opted instead to commit suicide.
Well, I think there was a search in all my life for, after my mother died, for somebody to kind of fill in, take her place, because I lost her at a very critical time in my life, and the time when we had planned to spend a lot of time together traveling.
Morgan's father threw himself into work, and Morgan started chasing girls. Morgan was a student at the University of Pennsylvania when Germany invaded Poland, an undergraduate in constant motion with no direction. In 1940, he enlisted in the Army Air Corps. With slightly less than standard vision, he failed the eye test. The doctor gave him a second chance and left the room. Morgan memorized the chart and passed. He learned to fly like all pilots of his era in PT-17 Stearman biplanes. Sure that war was approaching, the Army stripped its training down to the essentials. On only his second day in uniform, he was in the air with a flight trainer, learning the basics of flight. After only 6 hours and 10 minutes in the air, he soloed. In July 1941, Morgan graduated from Stearmans to BT-15s, trainers with enclosed cockpits that the young recruits noticed were just like the cockpits of fighter planes. At Bush Field in Augusta, Georgia, he and his classmates learned to navigate and land using only instruments. They learned formation flying and watched nervously as America was drawn closer to war. In September, a German submarine fired a torpedo at an American destroyer in the North Atlantic, and President Roosevelt gave American ships permission to attack and sink any submarine that lay in their path. As a result, Morgan completed his training in Georgia and opted for advanced training in bombers. In October, a U-boat sunk the destroyer Reuben James, beginning what came to be known as the Battle of the Atlantic. And Morgan walked along a line of bombers at Barksdale Field in Louisiana. The old bombers at Barksdale were already obsolete, But they had been built as warplanes, not as trainers, and they were bigger and had a deadlier look than anything Morgan had ever seen. Whatever excitement the pilots felt was tempered by marching. They'd enjoyed abbreviated basic training, they'd flown before they'd crawled, and now they were going to make up for it. There was going to be a war, and they were going to learn how to be military. So they marched and flew between marches, and their graduation was set for the middle of December. Morgan got his wings on schedule, married one of the many girls he'd been seeing, and reported for duty at MacDill Field in Florida. With America at last in the war, he flew submarine patrol in a Lockheed Hudson and checked out in a B-24 Liberator, the largest plane he had ever seen. In early 1942, Morgan and the other pilots at MacDill were introduced to the aircraft that they would actually fly into battle, the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress. Because he was spending more time with his airplane than with his wife, she left him. Morgan almost didn't notice. He flew over 600 hours in the next few months and received orders to report, along with the rest of the 91st Bomber Group, to Walla Walla, Washington for final training. As punishment for an incident in which he made an unauthorized landing at the Asheville, North Carolina airport, however, he did not fly. He traveled on a troop train. In August, he met Margaret Polk from Memphis, who was visiting her sister in Walla Walla. As he often had before, Morgan fell in love. A month later, they parted. She returned to Memphis, and he went to Maine to await his overseas orders. There, he convinced his crew to name their airplane the Memphis Belle in Margaret's honor. On a training flight, he made an unauthorized stop in Memphis to show her the plane and the nose art a corporal had decorated it with. He wrote her a letter proposing marriage and mailed it from his last stop in the United States before flying to England. "I'll return," he wrote, "to make you happy forever." And then he went to war. Early in World War II, the United States and Great Britain had a significant disagreement about bombing strategy. The English, who had some experience with bombing, had decided to bomb at night, sacrificing accuracy to preserve their crews and craft. The newly arrived Americans, on the other hand, studied the English experience and decided that the problem wasn't bombing in the daylight so much as it was the way the English bombed. Generals Ira Eaker and Carl Spaatz believed that by flying higher and taking advantage of the super-secret Norton bomb site, Americans could bomb during the day without suffering the horrendous losses the English predicted.
Nobody had written a book how to do this daylight strategic bombing. The generals didn't know any more than us second lieutenants, and we had to do it trial and error.
The Memphis Belle and the 91st Bomber Group took up residence in a town called Bassingbourn in East Anglia. The town was as beautiful as a postcard, and from there the war hardly seemed real. They flew practice missions until November 7th, when they were assigned their first combat mission, a raid on German submarine pens in Brest on the English Channel. On the way in, they met little resistance. They saw only one German fighter far out of range, and the only enemy they met face to face was the frigid cold of high altitude. Several planes turned back, and those that continued, including the Belle, missed their target. They returned home, however, thrilled at the taste of combat and anxious for their second mission. 2 days later, the Belle took off again, this time for the sub-pens at Saint-Nazaire. Concerned that bombing from very high altitude might not be the answer, the Brest ordered a mixed altitude strategy, with some flights coming in high and others low, theoretically sneaking up on the German air defenses.
They had it all figured out, and of course we thought it probably worked too. It didn't work. It looked like the Germans had a typewritten flight plan of what we were doing. We got the daylight shot out of us that day. I lost my squadron commander. We lost 2 other airplanes in our squadron.
Morgan, with a photo of Margaret attached to his plane's control panel, flew the Memphis Belle in low. As soon as they crossed the coast, the German anti-aircraft fire started and didn't let up, chewing up the planes at nearly point-blank range. The planes attacking high didn't fare any better. Morgan's top turret gunner watched helplessly as the Luftwaffe swooped in to feast on the helpless bombers. Not a single plane escaped undamaged. Several were lost. The Belle returned with 63 holes in it, remnants of German fire. On the next mission, the bombers tried another strategy, flying in 3 levels. Morgan and the Memphis Belle flew in the middle level, supposedly safe from the flak below and the fighters above. Instead, they got it from all sides. More than 100 Focke-Wulf 190s set up on the formation, and flak blew a huge piece out of the Belle's left wing. But as Morgan fought to keep the plane under control, his tail gunner shot down a German fighter. Terrifying as the sortie had been, the Memphis Belle had scored. Living in the comfort of Basingbourn and flying what was clearly a lucky plane, the crew of the Memphis Belle felt privileged, almost blessed. They worked well together, enjoyed each other's company in the air and on the ground, and felt a growing affection for their plane.
It's amazing how you can take 10 guys from 10 different parts of the country and put them together in a very small training period, which is not more than 3 months, and then go to combat. But we just happened to all fit together.
All around them, flyers were dying and planes were going down. 36 B-17s crossed the Atlantic with the 91st Bomber Group. By Christmas 1942, only the Belle and 6 others were still flying. Major Curtis LeMay, newly arrived in England, took a look at the appalling casualties and the insignificant damage the B-17s were inflicting on the Germans and decided on a change of strategy. He advocated attacking straight and level instead of weaving evasively in toward the target. He believed that coming in straight increased the accuracy of the bombing, which would protect air crews by requiring them to fly fewer missions to destroy a given target. The bomber crews, of course, thought LeMay was crazy, and the British protested that attacking straight and level during daylight would only increase the horrendous toll the Germans were already taking. LeMay persisted and proved his point by leading his own mission against the Germans, and the fact that he brought his group back alive seemed to prove his point. So it was with all eyes on them that the 91st set out for the sub-pens at Saint-Nazaire. Using LeMay's tactics for the first time and returning to an oft-visited target, they knew they were in for a fight. The Germans had placed more than 60 anti-aircraft batteries around the pens and had moved in other mobile batteries as well. Morgan and the Memphis Belle flew in the lead. As they approached the target, Morgan turned control of the plane over to his bombardier. For 90 long seconds, with flak bursting and planes going down all around, he sat helplessly. Vince Evans, the bombardier, guided the plane calmly in, staring down through the Norton bomb sight. A hit in World War II meant getting bombs down within 1,000 feet of the center of the target. The Norton released the bombs automatically, and they came down within 15 feet of the target. The planes flying behind the Belle released at the same time with the same accuracy. The sub-pens were devastated. The mission had sunk or damaged several U-boats and badly damaged the base. 10 B-17s didn't return, but the Belle, with flak holes all over her wings and fuselage, made it back to Basingbourn. Still, as the number of missions and casualties rose, morale among the flyers dropped. The American and British commands settled the night or day bombing controversy by agreeing to disagree. The RAF continued to fly at night, and the Americans continued to fly by day. The Americans flew in straight and level and continued to take heavy losses, even as they inflicted heavier damage on the Nazis. And then General Aker announced that any bomber crew that successfully completed 25 combat missions would get to go home. Though it did nothing to change the crew's prospects for survival, it did wonders to improve morale. From that point on, every mission for every crew was part of a countdown. William Wyler, one of Hollywood's most accomplished directors, wanted to make a movie about the effectiveness of strategic bombing. He approached Robert Morgan over drinks one night and asked if he could fly along with the crew of the Memphis Belle.
He flew 5 missions with us, and he never got in the way. And he was a very courageous guy. I mean, you see this guy walking and running all around the airplane with a Hotchkiss bottle in one hand and a camera in the other hand.
As Wyler photographed, Morgan and his crew counted down their missions. They bombed rail yards and factories that made locomotives. They fought the waves of fighters while bombing Focke-Wulf and Messerschmitt factories. They went up in good weather and bad and watched in wonder as planes on either side of them got shot out of the sky. Somehow the Belle continued. It came home damaged, sometimes severely, but it came home. In a mission over Bremen, deep in Germany, the 91st lost 6 of 29 planes. The Memphis Belle was hit 81 times, but it came home. Mission number 22, back to Saint-Nazaire. Number 23, with the Belle down for repairs, Morgan flew the Great Speckled Bird over Antwerp. The publicity spotlight began to shine on the Belle and her crew. Reporters sought Morgan out and wrote stories about the luckiest bomber crew in the world. Morgan and some of his men went to London to record a radio show, and he was surprised to find that people in the United States were aware not just of his battle history, but of his great romance with Margaret, the original Memphis Belle. The war had turned. 275,000 German and Italian troops had surrendered in North Africa. In the North Atlantic, the Germans were on the verge of suspending submarine operations, in large measure because of the damage inflicted by Allied bombers. The United States was hungry for heroes. Only 2 sorties away from being the first bomber crew to survive 25 missions, the crew of the Memphis Belle seemed perfect. But first, they had to survive. Mission 24 was confusing. The primary target was clouded over, and the secondary target too far away to reach and return safely. The group improvised, bombing a naval base on the tiny island of Helgoland in the North Sea. The public's attention was riveted on the plane, its pilot and crew. The 25th mission would be to the sub-pens at Lorient, France. They had been there before. They gathered on the runway beneath the Belle.
We had this particular thing all through our mission. When we went out to get on an airplane to go on a mission, we kind of got in a huddle like a football team did just before we stepped on the plane. And we said, look, guys, if only one airplane comes back today, it's going to be us.
Morgan wrote to Margaret saying he was preparing for his last mission and said that he would have the ground crew remove the name Memphis Belle from the plane when he was done. William Wyler was there, camera in hand, ready to film history. Morgan felt as if the whole world was watching.
You can't think, well, no, you know, this is 25th, and we got to make this one so we can go home.
Bill Winchell, the waist gunner, shot down an FW-190. Leading the bomber group, Bombardier Vince Evans dropped the bomb so accurately that one actually hit exactly on the target, an amazing feat for the time. And then it was over. 25 missions, 20,000 miles in battle, 60 tons of bombs, 8 confirmed fighter kills. The ground crew had replaced 9 engines, both wings, the main landing gear, and 2 tails to keep the Memphis Belle flying. Among those who wanted to meet the first crew to survive 25 combat missions were the King and Queen of England.
After the 25th mission, we brought the airplane back to the States, and we went on a 3.5-month tour around the public relations tour around the States, 31 cities.
Morgan, his crew, and his B-17 were heroes. As they traveled, they grew increasingly uncomfortable with the adulation they received at every stop. The war, after all, was still going on.
The hero status, we couldn't accept that because we all agreed we were just one bomber crew that did a job that we were given. My crew and I talked about this hero stuff. Heroes, as far as we were concerned, The real heroes were the guys that didn't come back.
Morgan and Margaret wanted to marry as soon as he returned, but the War Department asked, forcefully, if they would wait until after the national tour. They agreed. On the tour, Morgan had a little too much fun. He called Margaret from every stop, and in the background she heard too many women laughing, too many tinkling ice cubes. Margaret wanted to break up. Morgan wanted to elope. They haggled, and then Morgan met a new love.
I was introduced to the B-29 bomber, and it just blew my mind when I saw that big bomber. I said, gee whiz, I want to fly this.
Before they could patch things up, Morgan was training to go to the Pacific and bomb Japan. The great national love story was over. The breakup made the papers. He reported to Pratt Field in Kansas in October 1943 and got his first ride on a B-29. He started building his hours, learning the ins and outs of what was then the largest airplane ever built. He tried now and then to contact Margaret, but she made clear that if he was going back to the war, she wasn't interested. He married instead Dorothy Johnson, an unpretentious society girl from Asheville, North Carolina. They set up housekeeping in Kansas, and Morgan flew. On October 10, 1944, Morgan and the 497th Bomber Group took off for the Pacific. His new plane was named for his new love, Dauntless Dottie. He flew 26 missions against targets on Iwo Jima, Truk, and in Japan. He led the first strategic bombing mission against Japan from the island of Saipan, the first mission against the Japanese home islands since Jimmy Doolittle's raid in 1942. The raids against Japan were not like the raids on Germany. The B-29s dropped incendiary bombs designed to set cities afire. They were aimed not at military targets, but at civilians. He took off knowing that tens of thousands of people were going to die, and returned to base wanting more than ever just to go home. In April 1945, he got his orders. He arrived home once and for all the same day Adolf Hitler committed suicide. He, like the world around him, was tired of fighting. All he wanted to do was fly.
I still fly. As long as I pass my physical, I'll keep flying. And I still love to fly. I'd rather be up there than on the ground anytime.